It happened over something small, like these things always do. Megan was stirring her tea, clinking the spoon louder than necessary, and I simply said, "You might want to use honey instead of sugar. It's better for your throat." She didn't look at me, just rolled her eyes like I'd interrupted a board meeting, not offered a simple thought at her kitchen table. It wasn't the first time she'd done it, not even the 10th, but something about this one stuck. Maybe because the morning light hit her face just right, and I saw her without her mask, without the polite smile, the forced tone, the pretending. For just a second, she didn't see me as her husband's mother or even a person worth acknowledging. I was background noise. I folded my hands on the table and said nothing more. Josh wasn't in the room. He was always upstairs these days, either hunched over spreadsheets or headphones in. He worked in tech now, which meant he rarely looked up unless the Wi-Fi stopped. Megan had started calling the shots around here long before I moved in, but at least back then she used to fake kindness. Now she didn't bother. I lived in the downstairs room. They called it the guest suite, though it barely passed for one. No closet, a twin bed that creaked if you shifted your weight, a half bath that always smelled faintly of mildew. But I kept it tidy. I never left dishes in the sink. I cleaned their fridge when it needed it and folded their laundry when it piled too high. After James died, I didn't want to be alone. The silence of that house was too big. Josh offered, or rather Megan did, standing with a glass of wine in hand after the funeral and saying, "You should move in, we've got space." I should have asked, what kind of space? They'd just bought this place, a modern 4-bedroom in a sterile subdivision outside Asheville. They needed help with the down payment. I offered the remainder of my late husband's insurance, $130,000, plus another $20,000 from savings. Josh hesitated. Megan didn't. She hugged me and said, "You'll always have your place with us." We filed the papers together. The deed had my name next to Josh's. Megan didn't ask why. She probably assumed I wanted security, not leverage. I didn't move in to meddle. I brought just one trunk and a framed photo of James. I stayed quiet. I offered help. I gave them privacy, but something shifted once the walls stopped echoing. Once the place was painted, and they got comfortable. At first, it was little things. Megan laughed at my soap choices. She sighed when I didn't understand the smart thermostat. Then came the exclusions. Family dinner, where I wasn't called, conversations that paused when I entered the room, laundry loads left on the couch, just long enough for me to fold them. She never said anything cruel outright, but the silence was louder than words. This morning was worse. Not just because of the eye roll, but because of the look that followed it. A glance that said, "You don't belong here. Not anymore." Megan stood and took her tea without a word. Her heels clicked down the hallway like punctuation marks to an argument I never joined. I stared at the empty table for a long moment before getting up. My knees protested, as they always did, but I moved slow and steady, out of habit more than comfort. The kitchen window caught the morning light. Outside, the backyard sat untouched, perfect sod, artificial planters, not a real herb or blossom in sight. James would have hated it. I made myself tea, careful not to let the kettle whistle. I drank it standing up. I wasn't welcome to linger. Later that afternoon, I walked to the mail slot near the community center, an effort that cost me 30 minutes round trip, but I needed air. I needed to feel the world existed beyond the controlled temperature of Megan's house. On the walk back, I paused by the driveway, adjusting the weight of my purse against my shoulder. A silver SUV pulled in. Megan was behind the wheel, sunglasses on, hair perfect, jaw tight. She didn't smile, just lowered the window halfway and said, "You're okay to take the trash bins out, right?" I nodded. "Thanks," she said flatly, and rolled the window back up before I could answer. That night, over dinner, they didn't speak to me. I roasted chicken. Josh thanked me, but never looked up. Megan picked at her salad and spent the meal texting under the table. At one point, I asked how her sister's wedding planning was going. She looked up, blinked, and said, "It's fine." Then she rolled her eyes again, smaller this time, controlled, like it was muscle memory. I excused myself quietly and returned to my room. There, I opened my suitcase, the same one I brought a year ago. At the very bottom, beneath old greeting cards and James's faded polo shirt, was the folder, red, worn at the edges. Inside, The deed. Still signed. Still binding. Still mine. I didn't do anything yet. Didn't text a lawyer or pull up real estate listings. I just held the folder for a few minutes, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was recognition. A single moment where someone remembered that I mattered, not as a placeholder, or a maid, or a faded portrait of the past. Just as me. That night I went to bed early. I didn't cry. I didn't plan. I only lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Megan's heels tapping down the hallway above. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of someone moving confidently through a house she didn't fully own. But I did. The morning began with silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles over a home and rest, but the strained quiet of a house where people speak only when necessary. I moved slowly through the kitchen, careful not to clatter the kettle or rattle the drawer handles. Josh was already gone, his briefcase missing from the foyer, and Megan's car still sat in the driveway, gleaming like a trophy no one had earned. I placed 2 slices of bread into the toaster and stood still, watching them darken. Megan appeared in the doorway just as the toast popped up. She didn't say good morning. She never did anymore. She reached past me for the almond butter, brushing my shoulder without acknowledgement. I bought more oat milk, I said gently, motioning toward the fridge. That's fine, she said, her voice flat. I poured myself tea and stepped aside. She spread the almond butter in silence, then checked her phone. The moment felt suspended, like 2 actors frozen between lines in a play. Neither wanted to finish. I started to ask how her sister was doing, then stopped myself. What answer would she give me that wouldn't be dipped in disinterest? Instead, I sat with my tea at the far end of the table, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She ate standing up, as if sharing the table with me for even 10 minutes was too intimate. A few minutes later, her phone rang. She answered quickly and walked into the next room, but the door remained slightly ajar. I shouldn't have listened, but I didn't move. No, she's still here, Megan said. Her tone was hushed but unmistakably annoyed. I don't know what Josh's plan is. I told him she needs to start thinking about assisted living. There was a pause. I could hear her sip something. She's just always around, watching, hovering. It's like living with a librarian ghost. I tightened my grip on the mug. Another pause. No, she won't bring it up. She never does. She just looks disappointed all the time. I'm over it. I want my house back. There was a muffled laugh from the other end of the line. Megan continued. She doesn't even pay rent, but somehow she thinks she gets to comment on how I decorate, or raise my voice, or exist. I swear, one more unsolicited opinion and I'll scream. I didn't hear the rest. I stood, quietly, and walked back to my room, my footsteps muffled by the hall carpet. Once inside, I sat down on the bed and folded my hands together in my lap. It wasn't the words that hurt. Not really. I'd lived long enough to know people say cruel things when they think they're safe. What hurt was the ease of it. The comfort she felt speaking about me like I was a problem to be solved. Like I wasn't the woman who once drove 4 hours to babysit her niece when she had the flu, who made soup from scratch when she broke her foot, who kept the house spotless during her pregnancy so she could rest. What Megan didn't understand, what none of them seemed to understand, was that I had been watching too. Quiet wasn't the same as passive, and the version of me they built in their minds, docile, background, easily dismissed, wasn't the whole truth. That afternoon, I made myself useful. I dusted the windowsills, watered the plants, wiped the smudges off the fridge, not because I needed their approval, but because I needed to remember I was still capable of order, of care. Even if no one thanked me. While organizing the mail, on the kitchen counter, I found a letter tucked halfway behind a utility bill, an envelope from a local daycare. It was addressed to both Megan and Josh. Curious, I set it aside. That evening, when Josh finally returned home, I asked about it casually. His eyes darted to Megan, who just walked in with a glass of wine. We're just looking into options, Josh said. For what? I asked, knowing full well what he meant. Megan sipped her wine. We've been trying for a baby. I nodded slowly. Congratulations then. There was a pause. We'll need the space, she added, too pointedly. Josh flinched. I excused myself again, retreating to the quiet corner of my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, took out the red folder again, and laid it across my lap like a book I wasn't quite ready to read. I remembered signing it, sitting in the notary's office beside Josh. Megan had stayed in the car, scrolling her phone. I remember Josh thanking me, saying, "This means the world, Mom." At the time, I thought I was giving them a foundation. Now, I saw it for what it had become, a justification to erase me from the picture. That night, they didn't ask if I wanted dinner. I made myself a boiled egg and toast, and ate in silence. The house throbbed with muffled television, laughter, and footsteps that never came near my door. The next morning, I woke to Megan's voice again. Another phone call, this time in the hallway. "I think she knows. No, I haven't said anything direct. Josh doesn't want to hurt her feelings." Then a pause. "We'll wait until after the holidays. Or sooner, if she starts pushing back. We need that room." I lay in bed, eyes open, hands still. I didn't feel rage, just clarity. They weren't preparing to build a life with me in it. They were preparing to evict me from the one I helped them build. But they'd forgotten something important. They might have controlled the thermostat, the grocery list, the guest invites, but they didn't control the deed. I did. It started with the hallway light. For weeks it had flickered every so often. An old bulb, I assumed. I mentioned it to Josh once, and he nodded distractedly, saying he'd get to it. But he didn't. Then 3 days ago, the bulb went out completely. I didn't ask again. I began leaving my bedroom door cracked at night, so a sliver of kitchen light could make its way in. That single line of brightness, falling across the foot of my bed, was oddly comforting, like proof that someone else was still awake in the house, even if they weren't speaking to me. That evening, Megan was bustling around the kitchen with a tablet in one hand and her phone in the other. She was making a smoothie while reading Yelp reviews and checking something in her calendar. I stepped in to make tea, and for a moment we shared the room in a tense silence broken only by the whir of the blender. Then she sighed and said, "We need to talk soon about your long-term plans." I didn't look at her. I focused on the kettle. "Josh and I are trying to be proactive," she added, a forced sweetness in her voice. "We just think it might be time to start thinking about next steps. You know, something more suitable for your stage." I turned then, meeting her eyes. "My stage?" I repeated. She gave a short, awkward laugh. "I didn't mean it like that. Just a quieter place. Maybe near a park. Senior apartments have nice communities." "I'm not asking to leave," I said evenly. She blinked, as if I'd said something inappropriate. "It's not personal, Linda. It's just logistics. We're expanding our family." I nodded. "And you think the only space to grow is the one I'm in?" Megan hesitated, then shrugged, turning back to her tablet. "We'll talk more later." But there was nothing more to say. That night, I returned to my room and closed the door more firmly than usual. I stood in the center of the floor and looked around, not as a tenant, but as someone measuring what remained: the twin bed, the nightstand with the chipped corner, my sweater folded neatly on the back of the chair. I hadn't made this room my own. Not really. I'd kept it temporary, just like they'd wanted. But they'd forgotten that what's written in ink doesn't fade with silence. The next morning, while they were out, Josh at the office, Megan at some prenatal yoga class, I pulled down the file box I kept beneath the bed. Inside were old tax returns, warranty papers from James's car, a few letters we wrote to each other during his army years. I dug until I found what I was looking for: the copy of the deed. My name, printed next to Josh's, 49% ownership, signed, witnessed, notarized. It wasn't about money. It was about being written off. I placed the copy into a manila envelope and tucked it into my handbag. Then I changed clothes and called for a cab. I didn't want to risk asking Megan to borrow the car or explain anything to Josh. Not yet. The cab took me downtown to a law office, tucked between a bakery and an old post office. I hadn't made an appointment. I simply walked in, asked to speak with someone regarding co-ownership and residential rights, and was seated across from a young woman named Valerie within 15 minutes. She had short hair, round glasses, and a voice like smooth paper. I laid the deed on the table and explained my situation: how I'd funded their home, how I'd been living in it, how they were now planning to remove me, gently but with intent. Valerie listened, without interruption. When I finished, she tapped the corner of the deed with a pen and said, "You're not powerless here, Mrs. D'Arienzo. In fact, you're quite protected. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She continued, if you wanted, you could force a sale, or demand rent, or issue a notice of claim. There are options. I don't want to ruin them, I said softly. I just don't want to be discarded. Valerie nodded slowly. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remind people of your worth. Quietly, legally, without drama. She made copies of the deed, filed a protective notice for shared ownership, and gave me a folder with my rights outlined in plain language. I left the office, not angry, not triumphant, but steady. I stopped by a small cafe on the way home, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. When I returned home, Megan's shoes were by the door. The sound of her voice drifted from the living room, sharp and animated. And if we can get the guest room cleared by next month, we can start painting, she was saying. I didn't interrupt. I walked quietly to my room and closed the door behind me. Then I placed the legal folder in the drawer beside my bed and locked it. That night, during dinner, I asked Josh how work was. He blinked, surprised by the conversation. Busy, he said. We're pitching to a new client. Megan glanced up from her phone. We were just talking about house projects, thinking of doing something fun with the downstairs. I smiled gently. Funny, I've been thinking about the house too. She tilted her head. Yeah? I nodded. We should definitely talk. Soon. Josh looked between us, unsure. Megan smiled tightly, and I went back to my soup, letting them both sit in the silence I now owned. The next day, Megan left a folded brochure on the kitchen counter. I didn't see her place it there, but it was the only thing not mine among the coffee grounds and folded napkins. Willow Pines, Independent Living, where retirement meets comfort. Read the front, decorated with images of happy seniors playing bridge and sipping tea in sunlit common rooms. I didn't touch it. I left it sitting exactly where she had left it, between the fruit bowl and the coupon flyer, as if untouched paper could speak louder than confrontation. By mid-morning, I heard her upstairs on the phone. Her voice carried in that way. Voices do when the speaker doesn't care who's listening anymore. She won't say it, Megan was saying, but I think she knows. I mean, I didn't leave that brochure there by accident. Josh says we need to be patient, but I'm not spending another pregnancy feeling like I'm hosting a museum exhibit downstairs. There was a long pause. No, she's not mean, she's just always there. I moved into the dining room and began dusting the cabinet, letting each word settle like a layer I couldn't sweep away. Later that afternoon, I pulled out my recipe notebook, tattered and yellowed, edges curled like dry petals. I found the page with James's favorite biscotti, the one with orange zest and crushed pistachios, and set to work. The kitchen was quiet, for once. Josh had taken a rare half-day and gone out for a walk, and Megan was in her car, on speakerphone, closing some vendor deal. The scent of citrus and almonds filled the kitchen. I didn't bake them to impress. I did it because it steadied my hand. By the time the biscotti cooled, Megan was back. I left the tin open on the counter, a clean napkin folded beside it. She came in moments later, scrolling her phone. These are yours? She asked, surprised. I nodded. James used to like them with his afternoon coffee. She picked one up and bit into it. They're good, she admitted, though her voice carried no warmth. Maybe you could write the recipe down. Josh might want it for Christmas. I looked at her for a moment. If I go, Megan, will you tell the baby about me? She blinked, caught off guard. I continued, will I be someone they remember? Or just the woman who once used their nursery? Her expression faltered. You're being dramatic. I shook my head, not in protest, but in quiet resignation. No, I'm being direct, something you've always preferred. She didn't answer. She finished the biscotti and left the napkin on the counter, folded like it hadn't been used at all. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the way the house spoke when it thought no one was awake. The heater's soft exhale, the fridge humming through the drywall, the faint clack of Megan's laptop keys upstairs. My room felt smaller now, like the walls were gently leaning in, but I didn't move. The next morning, Megan approached me, just as I finished watering the planter box out back. The rosemary was still holding on. James always said it grew best in dry conditions, like people who knew how to survive on little and still taste like something real. We want to have a meeting tonight, Megan said, stepping onto the patio. Just the three of us. Around 7. You don't have to cook. I nodded. All right. She didn't linger, just turned and went back inside, her sandals slapping softly against the wood planks. I spent the rest of the day pacing mentally more than physically. I folded laundry I'd already folded. I rearranged my drawer and packed 2 blouses into a bag before unpacking them again. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even angry, but the uncertainty of what they thought they had the right to say weighed more than I expected. At 7 sharp, I entered the dining room. Megan had cleared the table and lit a candle in the middle, as if ambiance would soften the agenda. Josh was seated, his hands loosely clasped, face unreadable. Thanks for coming, Megan began, like she was opening a team meeting. We've been thinking a lot about the future. I sat down, folding my hands on my lap. Josh cleared his throat. Mom, we love you. You know that. Megan jumped in. But we're trying to grow, physically, emotionally. And that includes the house. We were thinking, maybe it's time we find a better fit for you. I said nothing. Josh continued, awkward now. Just somewhere with community, activities, places, with more support in case I become too much trouble, I asked gently. No, Megan said quickly. It's just about quality of life. For whom? I asked again. Neither answered. I leaned forward slightly. Do you think this was easy for me? Living in your home? Being the quiet breath between your sentences? I didn't come here because I wanted to feel invisible. We're not saying that, Josh said, though his voice lacked conviction. I know, I said. You're saying it with brochures, with locked glances, with your silence at dinner. Megan shifted in her chair. We just need the room. I nodded. I understand. They both seemed surprised. Perhaps they expected a protest. Or tears. But understand me, too, I said calmly. I own part of this house, legally, signed and filed. And while I may not want to stay where I'm not welcome, I won't be ushered out like a guest whose time ran out. Josh looked up. Mom, I've already seen a lawyer, I continued. I know my rights, and I won't be bullied out of them. The room fell still. The candle flickered. I don't want to fight, I added, standing. But I won't be forgotten. Not after everything. Then I walked back to my room, the same room they'd already begun planning to erase. And for the first time, I shut the door with purpose. They didn't speak to me for 2 days. Josh left earlier than usual, both mornings, keys jangling louder than necessary, as if trying to fill a silence he couldn't bear. Megan moved through the house like steam, quiet, hot, impossible to grasp. She closed cabinets a little too hard, sighed, when she passed me in the hallway. I didn't mind. Cold shoulders were easier than false warmth. I returned to my rhythm. Tea in the morning. A short walk to the mailbox around noon. Quiet afternoons in my room, where the deed now lay locked in the drawer beneath my folded nightgown. The folder no longer felt like a weapon. It was protection, a name carved into the structure they built with my money and now hoped to bury me beneath. I overheard them whispering again on the 3rd night. The laundry room shares a vent with the downstairs hall, and sound moves strangely through ductwork. Megan's voice reached me first, clipped and hushed. She said she's not staying, but she's not leaving either. I don't get it, Josh responded. Lower. She's just trying to buy time. She'll back down, eventually. That was the part that stung. Not the whispering, but the assumption that I would soften, that I would fold. They still didn't understand me. That evening, I cooked dinner without being asked. I didn't do it for them. I needed the structure. I browned onions, seared rosemary chicken, boiled potatoes, the kitchen filled with a smell that reminded me of Sundays long ago, back when Josh ran into the house, still wearing cleats, and James wiped his forehead with a folded napkin before sitting down. Josh came down late, pausing at the threshold when he saw the food on the table. You didn't have to, he said. I know, I replied, setting down the silverware. He sat. Megan didn't. She was still upstairs. For a few minutes, we ate in silence. The air hung thick with unspoken memories and new disappointments. Halfway through the meal, Josh set down his fork and rubbed his temple. I don't know how it got this bad, he murmured. You stopped seeing me, I said. He looked up. Not just as your mother, I added, but as a person. Josh's shoulders fell. Megan's just stressed. The baby, her job. I didn't mean. I cut him off gently. You don't have to explain her, but you do have to own your part. He nodded, slowly. His eyes flicked toward the kitchen, where Megan's blender sat idle. I know this isn't fair to you, but things feel complicated. They only feel that way, I said, because you've spent a year pretending I'm not here. We finished eating, and he took his plate to the sink, without another word. The next morning, Megan was in the living room, curled on the couch with a throw blanket and a laptop open on her knees. She looked up when I entered, eyes tired but sharper than usual. Josh told me about your talk. I nodded. She closed the laptop slowly. You really spoke to a lawyer? I did. She didn't move. And you'll fight us? If we try to move forward? I won't fight, I said, but I won't disappear either. Her jaw tightened. We weren't trying to make you disappear. You left a brochure on the counter, I reminded her. You locked the upstairs thermostat. You called me a ghost when you thought I couldn't hear. Megan's eyes narrowed, a flicker of defensiveness surfacing before she swallowed it back down. She folded the blanket around her arms, more armor than comfort. I didn't know how to live with someone who doesn't take up space, but still fills every room. That says more about you than me, I replied. She looked away. Later that afternoon, I found her in the kitchen again. She'd baked cookies, her first batch in months. The counters were dusted with flour, and the sink was stacked with mixing bowls. I left some out for you, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I took one. It was too sweet, underbaked, but I ate it without comment. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Do you ever regret giving us the money? I didn't answer right away. I looked at her face, not the tight expression she wore in arguments, but the quieter version, the one that emerged when her voice lowered. I regret giving it without understanding what I'd be trading for it. She nodded once. We were desperate. I told Josh it was the only way we'd get the house. And you got it, I said softly. Now you're trying to get rid of what came with it. Megan exhaled slowly, like she was releasing something heavy. I don't hate you. You know. I know, I said, but you don't respect me either. The next morning, I received an envelope under my door. No name, just a folded note. Inside was a single sentence in Megan's handwriting. If you stay, it has to be different. I sat with that line all day. I didn't respond, but I didn't pack either. That evening, I moved my chair from the back corner of the living room to the window facing the street. I opened the blinds just enough to let in the evening light and sat down with a fresh cup of tea. I didn't hide in my room. I didn't wait to be spoken to. I sat where I could be seen. And when Megan came down the stairs, she saw me. She looked once, paused, then walked past without a word. But she saw me. That was enough for now. It was the scent that struck me first. Fresh paint, sharp, chemical, unmistakable, wafted down the hall before I even reached the door. My room. My feet slowed, but I kept walking, drawn by some instinct older than dignity. The door was open, light spilled in across the carpet, and Megan stood in the middle of the room, holding a paint roller in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked up like she'd been caught in something intimate, but there was no apology in her face. Oh, she said flatly. I didn't know you were back. I looked around. The bed had been pushed into the corner. My nightstand was missing. The curtains, my old lace ones, were gone, replaced with a sheer blue pair that matched nothing else. You're painting, I said, voice steady. She nodded, brushing a stray hair from her cheek. We talked about it, remember? The baby. We were going to need the space. I stepped inside. The closet door was ajar, and I could see a stack of cardboard boxes labeled nursery supplies in Megan's careful handwriting. I wasn't told you'd be starting today, I said. Megan returned to her phone. We had a gap in the contractor's schedule. Figured we should move while we can. Timing's never perfect. A plastic sheet lay crumpled near the door, half pulled away. My slippers, brown ones with worn soles, sat beside it, quietly exiled. I bent to pick them up. One had a streak of paint across the toe. You didn't ask, I said quietly. Megan exhaled, setting the roller down in the tray. I thought we were moving forward. You said you weren't going to fight us. I'm not fighting, I replied. But I still live here. That hasn't changed. She crossed her arms. You've made it clear you don't want to stay. I've made it clear I won't be pushed. Megan looked past me, her gaze fixed on something beyond the moment. Maybe the future she was trying to carve with a roller and a coat of pastel paint. We thought you'd be packed by now, she said. Josh assumed you'd go quietly. I'm not something to be packed, I said. And I don't vanish on assumption. There was a long pause. Then she turned away, mumbling, we'll find another time. But the damage was done. I went back to the kitchen, placed the slippers beside the back door, and sat at the small breakfast table. My tea was cold. I drank it anyway. Josh came home late that evening. I heard the front door open, the soft murmur of their voices upstairs, then a door closed, firmer than necessary. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd lived too long to mistake tone for content. Around 9, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Josh standing there, hands in his pockets, the same way he used to when he was 10 and trying to hide a scraped elbow. She didn't mean anything by it, he started. She never does, I replied. He nodded slowly. We just got ahead of ourselves. I let the silence answer him. Finally, he said, would you be willing to talk to someone about next steps? I already did, I said. She gave me options. I chose to wait. To wait for what? For someone to treat me like I mattered. He looked down. We're trying, Mom. No, I said gently. You're managing. There's a difference. He left after that. Said he needed to figure some things out. I didn't stop him. I returned to the window, the one that faced the quiet street, and watched the streetlights flicker on. The next morning, I packed. Not everything, just enough. 2 suitcases. One with clothes, the other with documents, photos, a jewelry box James gave me on our 30th anniversary. I stacked them near the door and sat in the living room, waiting. Josh came down first. He looked at the bags, then at me. You're really going? For a while. He didn't ask where. Megan didn't come down at all. Not until the sound of the cab tires crushed the gravel in the driveway. She stood at the top of the stairs, hand on the railing. She didn't speak. I didn't wave. I slid into the back seat, gave the driver an address 1 town over, and didn't look back. The ride was short, just 22 minutes. But in that time, I let go of more than they would ever understand. The address belonged to a furnished rental owned by the daughter of a woman from my church. Quiet place, no lease, pay in cash, and keep to yourself, that's all they asked. The key was waiting in a lockbox. The walls were bare, the sofa stiff, but it was mine. No brochures, no whispers, no paint without warning. That night, I slept with the deed folder on the nightstand beside me, not because I feared they'd come for it, but because it reminded me I'd left on my own terms. I wasn't waiting for them to throw me out anymore. I had rolled away quietly, but deliberately, with what mattered most. The rental house had no pictures on the walls, no books on the shelves, no scent in the air, except the faint trace of lemon cleaner left behind by whoever vacuumed before I arrived. It didn't feel like home, but it didn't feel like a place where I had to keep my voice down, either. I didn't bring much with me. A small box of mementos, 2 worn sweaters, a mug with a chip on the lip, the one James had used every morning for decades. When I unpacked it, I placed it on the counter like it belonged there, though there wasn't a single other thing in the kitchen that carried meaning. I spent that first evening in silence, sitting on the unfamiliar sofa, listening to the tick of a clock I hadn't noticed earlier. It echoed in a way that reminded me of old waiting rooms, the kind where the magazines are outdated and the air smells of worry. But even that felt better than being under someone's roof, with a countdown on my presence. The following morning, I took a walk. The neighborhood was quiet, just one long road lined with tired bungalows and the occasional blooming azalea. A few driveways had cracked pavement. Most mailboxes leaned a little. There was comfort in that. Imperfection that no one was rushing to erase. I stopped at a corner cafe that had only 2 tables inside and a woman named Connie behind the counter, who called everyone Han, whether she knew them or not. I ordered plain coffee and sat by the window. That's where I noticed the notice board. It hung crooked on the wall next to the exit. A mishmash of things: dog walkers, lawn services, piano lessons, a grief support group, flyer with a peeled corner. But one note caught my eye. A handwritten index card. Need help organizing papers? Light errands, I'm quick, kind, and good with details. I don't know why I took the number, maybe because I had papers that still needed sorting, or maybe because after all the noise at Josh and Megan's house, I realized I wanted to hear a voice that didn't speak to me like I was the problem. Back at the rental, I called the number. A young woman answered, her voice soft but alert. Emma, speaking. I introduced myself. I explained I wasn't frail or ill, just reorganizing my life. There was a pause, then a smile in her voice. Would tomorrow morning work? I live nearby. She arrived the next day. Right on time, late 20s, bright scarf, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She wore no makeup and asked if I wanted her to take off her shoes before entering. I liked her already. We sat at the table with the red folder between us. I don't need legal advice, I said. Just order. Emma nodded. We'll sort it into 3 piles, legal, financial, personal. I brought labels. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need answers to. She didn't comment on the lack of photos in the house or why someone my age was living in a rental alone. She just helped. While we worked, I learned that she used to work in records management at a hospital, but now freelanced, partly by choice, partly by circumstance. I needed a break from fluorescent lights and bureaucracy, she said with a shrug. I smiled. You sound like someone who survived something. She looked at me then, directly. A few things. I didn't ask more. She didn't offer more. There was mutual respect in the silence. By noon, my folder was neatly categorized, 3 clean stacks labeled and sealed. She was packing up when I asked, would you be open to coming back next week? She smiled, tucking her scarf into her coat. I'd like that. That evening, as the light turned gold and fell across the bare floor, I sat with the folder again, not to sort it, not to plan, just to hold it, to remember that this wasn't just paperwork. It was proof I still had agency, that I wasn't someone they could edit out. 2 days later, Josh called. I didn't answer the first time, or the second, but on the third, I picked up. Mom? His voice was uncertain, like he was stepping onto a frozen lake, unsure if it would hold. I'm here, I said. A beat of silence. I didn't know you'd left. Megan told me after. I waited. I looked for your things. You took almost nothing. I took what I needed. Another pause. I found the deed folder in your drawer, the copy. I didn't hide it. He let out a breath. I didn't know you'd really go. You never thought I'd stay. He was quiet. Then, we miss you. No, I said gently. You miss what I gave, not who I was. He didn't argue. I'm not coming back, Josh. Not the way things were. I gave you a home. You turned it into a house with rules I didn't write. I didn't mean to. I know, I said. But meaning and doing are different things. He didn't call again that night. I didn't expect him to. But I slept, better than I had in weeks. Josh showed up on a Thursday morning, unannounced. I was watering the rosemary out front, using a tin can I'd saved from last week's soup. The air was still cool, sun just beginning to warm the concrete path. I heard the crunch of gravel under slow tires, then the familiar thud of a car door that didn't quite close right, unless you gave it a second push. When I turned, there he was, standing beside the rental's gate, hands in his pockets, wearing the same beige jacket he'd owned since college. He didn't wave, just nodded once, as if asking permission to step closer. You found it, I said. He walked toward me, eyes down, scanning the little yard as if it might tell him something about my life here. You didn't leave a forwarding address, he said. Megan found it on an old check stub. I didn't correct him. I'd left it there on purpose. Josh shifted his weight. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I set the can down by the base of the rosemary and wiped my palms on my sweater. I'm managing. His eyes met mine then. They were the same eyes that once lit up when I picked him up from school or found his lost backpack. But now they carried something else, something dulled. Can I come in? He asked. I paused before opening the screen door. If you're here to explain Megan's choices, don't. I've already heard them. He followed me, inside. The rental was exactly as I left it, uncluttered, faintly floral from yesterday's candle, tea mug still drying by the sink. He stood just inside the doorway, like he didn't quite belong. You can sit, I offered. He lowered himself onto the sofa, hands resting on his knees, his shoulders hunched in a way I recognized from childhood. His posture when he was about to admit to something. "I didn't stop her," he said. "That's what I keep thinking. Not that she tried to take over or turn the house into something it wasn't, but that I didn't stop her from doing it." I sat across from him. "You let her believe I was temporary." "I let myself believe it too," he whispered. The weight of his words settled between us. "I don't hate you, Josh," I said, "but I needed you to notice what I was becoming in that house. A ghost in the home I helped you build." He looked up. "You did more than help." "I gave what I had left," I said. "And I would have stayed if I had been seen." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, carefully folded. "I brought this," he said. "It's a letter from the lawyer about the title. I wanted you to have a fresh copy. I didn't know if yours got left behind." I took it, sliding it gently into my lap. "It didn't, but thank you. I also came to ask," he said hesitantly, "if you'd be willing to talk about next steps, not returning, but maybe sharing what comes next. For the baby." I met his gaze. "Why now?" He didn't blink. "Because Megan and I started arguing about it, and for once I realized I didn't want to win the argument. I wanted to do the right thing." Silence stretched again. "You know," I said softly, "I don't need to be part of your child's life out of guilt." He nodded. "But if I'm invited," I added, "with honesty, with room to belong, then I'll come." Josh's face shifted, then not into a smile, but into something softer. Something like relief. He nodded again, this time slower. We sat there a while longer. He told me the baby was due in April, that they hadn't picked a name yet, that Megan's mother would be staying with them for the first 2 weeks, but after that he didn't know who to lean on. "I'm not asking for anything now," he said, "but maybe later, if you're willing, we can talk again." I rose, walked to the stove, and put the kettle on. "You can stay for tea," I said. He smiled faintly. "I'd like that." I poured water over the loose chamomile I kept in a jar by the sink and handed him one of the mismatched mugs the rental came with. "I miss your biscotti," he said, holding the mug. I didn't smile, but I didn't look away. "Then you'll need to come back," I said. "With notice." He nodded, sipping carefully. When he left an hour later, he turned at the gate. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. I watched him go. I didn't cry. I didn't plan my return. But I did open the envelope he left. And I slid it in with the rest of the papers, stacked, labeled. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. I wasn't expecting anything. Certainly not a thick envelope addressed in Megan's looping handwriting. There was no return address, just a single line beneath my name, Linda D'Arienzo, CO Crestwood Lane. That was enough to find me. Though I never told them where to send anything. I held it for a long while before opening it, like it might vanish if I waited. The first page was a typed note. Formal, strangely careful. "Linda, I know we've said too much and also not enough. Josh told me he visited. I wasn't ready to speak then. Maybe I'm still not, but I'm trying to be better at saying what I mean before it's too late." It went on for a full page, then a second, descriptions of the baby's first kicks. A moment Megan had panicked during a prenatal appointment, and Josh had calmly placed his hand on her shoulder. How he reminded her of me then. How she hated that realization at first, and then missed it. "You scared me, you know, not in a threatening way, in the way people are scared of being seen. You lived in our home like a mirror. I didn't ask for, and I didn't like what I saw in my own reflection." That line stopped me. I set the pages down on the table and stared at the kettle. Not boiling, not whistling. The silence in the house was a kind one. No thudding footsteps overhead, no whispering in the hall. Megan had enclosed a small photo in the envelope. A sonogram image with the name Baby D'Arienzo scrawled in marker along the corner. Below it, a note. "Due April 11. We'd like you to be there." No promises, no forced apologies, just the first real invitation since I'd walked away. The next day, Emma came by for our usual session. We didn't work on the papers this time. I made us lunch. Simple egg salad on cracked wheat, slices of pear, chamomile tea, steeped in a pot, I found at the thrift store down the block. She noticed the envelope on the counter. "Looks important," she said. "It is." She waited. She never pushed. "I think I'm being invited back into a life I didn't think they wanted me in anymore." Emma tilted her head. "Do you want that?" I don't want to disappear, I said, but I don't want to return on their terms. You already left once, she said gently. You know how to leave. Now you get to decide how to show up. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That night, I pulled the red folder from the bottom drawer again. It had grown over the weeks, copies of statements, handwritten notes from Emma, revised ownership agreements that Valerie the lawyer had drafted on my behalf. I'd built it quietly, layer by layer, the way some people build escape plans or emergency kits, except mine wasn't for leaving anymore. It was for deciding how I'd stay. Friday came with rain. I took it as a sign. I packed a small bag. Not like before, no long-term planning, no rolled-up sweaters or backup nightgowns, just a few essentials, the red folder and a jar of biscotti I'd baked the night before. Pistachio and orange zest. I wasn't going to their home to make a point. I was going as myself. Josh answered the door with a look that held both surprise and relief. He stepped aside without speaking. Inside, the house was the same, and yet entirely different. A fresh coat of paint lined the hallway, the color of fog, softer than the pastels Megan had once chosen. The room I used to stay in no longer existed. Where the bed once stood, there was now a bassinet. Bookshelves held baby care manuals and knitted toys. The windows wore gauzy curtains that danced in the breeze. Megan stood by the dining table, one hand resting over her belly. She looked tired in the way expectant mothers do, gently frayed but holding steady. I set the jar on the table. For you, I said. She ran her hand over the lid before lifting it and breathing in. They smell like your kitchen, she said. I nodded. Josh pulled out a chair for me, and we all sat. No speeches, no lists of regrets, just the three of us and the sound of rain softening against the windows. Megan placed the sonogram on the table. It was the same one from the envelope, but here, now, it felt more than printed plastic. It was an invitation to remember that life keeps moving, even when it breaks us along the way. We don't know what we're doing, Megan said suddenly. With the baby, with this. But I don't want to raise a child who only knows you through stories. I don't want to be a ghost, I replied. She looked up. Then don't be. I reached into my bag and slid the red folder across the table. I don't need to live here, I said. But I still own part of this house. And I'm not signing that away. What I will do is share on my terms. Josh nodded slowly. Megan touched the folder but didn't open it. That's fair, she said. We sat like that for a while. Then I asked if I could feel the baby kick. Megan smiled, placed my hand over her belly, and whispered, "Wait." A moment passed. Then, the smallest flutter. And I stayed. The next visit wasn't planned, but it felt necessary. It was a week after I touched Megan's belly and felt that first, unmistakable flutter of life, proof that time didn't stop just because I had paused. The days since had passed slowly at the rental. I made tea, I read the paper, I folded dish towels in neat, even thirds, but something had shifted in me. Subtle, like the click of a door once thought jammed suddenly giving way. I didn't want to move back in. That part was certain. But I also no longer wanted to orbit their lives like a distant star, invited only when it was convenient. So when Megan texted to say they'd cleaned out the closet and the spare room, not the nursery, just space for you to sit if you ever want to rest, I said yes. I didn't ask what was in the room before. I simply said I'd be by the next afternoon. When I arrived, the sun was soft behind the clouds, casting a light that made the sidewalks glow faintly. I wore my blue cardigan, the one James once said made me look like I kept secrets, in the sleeves. I brought no bag, no tin of cookies, no folder of legal weight. I brought only myself. Josh opened the door this time with a quiet nod and stepped aside, letting me pass through like I hadn't once lived inside these walls. I paused in the entryway, not out of hesitation but instinct, checking for the tone of a house, the way some people check the weather. It was quieter than I remembered. Not hushed like avoidance, but calmer. Josh led me past the living room and down the hall to the room that used to be mine. The door was open. The furniture was new. A small armchair by the window. A narrow writing desk with no clutter. The closet had only a few hangers and an extra blanket folded on the shelf. A lamp with a warm, amber shade cast a golden circle across the floor. Megan stood by the window, arms folded across her middle, not defensive, but thoughtful. I thought this room needed to remember how to hold space, she said. I took a slow breath and stepped inside. The chair was comfortable, not plush, not fragile, just something steady to sit in. I ran my hand over the desk. No perfume in the drawer? I asked lightly. Megan smiled a little. Not anymore. I sat down and crossed my hands in my lap. Megan sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me without flinching. I didn't understand it before, she said. How a house can feel haunted even when everyone's alive. I do, I replied. She nodded slowly. I used to feel you judging me, she admitted. Every time I raised my voice or bought something that didn't feel practical. I wasn't judging, I said. I was grieving, quietly. For James? I looked toward the window, for a version of family I thought I had. Josh came in then, holding a tray with tea and 3 cups. He set it down on the desk and sat on the floor near Megan's feet, like he used to do as a boy when we'd host family dinners and run out of chairs. I want our child to know you, he said, but not in pieces, not as someone we remember to invite. I don't need to live here, I said, echoing what I had told them before. But I need to be seen. Josh nodded. We see you now. I looked down at the teacup he'd set before me. It was my old one, the one Megan had once said was too chipped for guests. It had been scrubbed clean, the crack still visible, but harmless. That night, I stayed longer than I'd planned. I watched them prepare dinner. I offered to slice the bread and was accepted without ceremony. Megan played soft music from her phone, nothing lyrical, just soft piano notes that left space for conversation. As I sat in the corner chair of the old guest room with a blanket draped over my knees, I realized I didn't need to reclaim space anymore. I'd already done that. Not with anger, not with a lawyer, but with boundaries and grace. With walking away and returning on my feet, not on theirs. The house didn't feel like mine. But I no longer felt like I didn't belong. When I stood to leave, Megan walked me to the door. She didn't reach for a hug. I didn't offer one. But she held the door open gently and said, "Next time, stay for lunch." "I might," I said. "And I might bring biscotti." She smiled. "I'll clear a shelf," she replied. A month passed, then another. I didn't rush back into their lives, and they didn't try to rewrite history too quickly. We were cautious. Each step forward weighted with the memory of all we didn't say when it would have been easier. But that was how real repair worked. It didn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. It crept in quietly, like a sunbeam finding a crack in a closed curtain. I visited every other Sunday now. I always brought something small, a casserole, a newspaper clipping, a half loaf of olive bread from the bakery 2 blocks from the rental. I never stayed the night. But I never left early either. The baby was due any day now. Megan had grown slower, softer in her movements. She wasn't warm exactly, but she had stopped guarding the edges of her voice. Josh was gentler too, less concerned with being right, more present. One afternoon, I brought over a photo album I'd found while reorganizing a shelf. Inside were pictures of Josh as a baby, chubby arms, dirt-smeared cheeks, a gap-toothed grin in a plastic kiddie pool. Megan sat beside me on the couch, while Josh leaned against the kitchen counter, a dish towel in one hand. "He looks like you in this one," Megan said, pointing to a photo of toddler Josh scowling at a spilled bowl of spaghetti. "He was always dramatic," I replied. She laughed, the sound small, but real. Later, after she went to lie down, Josh walked me out to the car. "She's scared," he said, "but she's trying." I looked at him. "So are you." He leaned on the door frame. "I don't know what we're doing, Mom." "You're building something. You just forgot the foundation for a while." Josh reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded paper, creased soft at the corners. He handed it to me. "It's the deed paperwork. We filed the amendment you sent. You're now listed as primary co-owner." I stared at the page for a long moment. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said. "It was always yours too." I folded the paper, tucked it in my purse, and nodded. It wasn't about the house anymore. It never really had been. It was about place, voice, legacy. A week later, I got the call. Water broke. "We're headed in," Josh said quickly. "Megan asked if you'd meet us at the hospital." I paused. "She asked?" She did. I changed slowly, deliberately. A fresh blouse, the blue cardigan, my nicest flats. I grabbed the red folder, not out of necessity, but ritual. Then I tucked it away and slid the biscotti tin into my bag instead. The hospital was 30 minutes away. When I arrived, the air was thick with the energy only hospitals carry. Too many lights, too much movement, and yet an overwhelming stillness in every waiting room. Josh met me in the lobby, face pale but steady. She's doing well. They've started monitoring, but it's early. He led me to the maternity wing, where Megan's room faced a small garden courtyard. She was sitting up in bed, hair pulled back, face bare, no makeup, no armor. "You came," she said. "You asked," I replied. The nurse came in then, smiling, checking her vitals. "I'll wait outside," I said. "No," Megan said quietly. "Stay." So I sat in the chair by the window, watching the early spring wind move through the bushes. Megan's contractions began slowly. Josh held her hand through each one. I stayed in the background, offering water, a damp cloth, silence. Hours passed. Then more. Evening fell. At some point, Megan turned to me. "Did you go through this alone?" I nodded. James was in the waiting room. Back then, that's where they kept fathers. She closed her eyes, breathing through the next wave of pain. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," I said, "but never sorry." Megan squeezed Josh's hand. "I don't want to mess this up." "You won't," I told her, "because you know what that feels like." At dawn, the baby arrived, pink and squirming, and louder than anything I'd heard in years. Josh cut the cord. Megan cried. I sat in the corner, hands folded, eyes wide. They didn't ask me to leave. The nurse cleaned and swaddled him. Then Josh walked over and placed him, his son, into my arms. He was warm. He smelled of milk and new beginnings. "I don't know what to say," Josh whispered. "You don't have to," I said, rocking gently. The baby blinked up at me, unfocused, but alive. He would never know about the eye rolls, the silence, the closed doors and sharp corners. He would only know the woman who rocked him first with steady hands. After the baby came, everything slowed. The days no longer rushed toward a deadline, no whispered arguments, no hurried exits from the room. When I walked in, the house quieted in a new way, less tension, more fatigue, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from conflict, but from sleepless nights and the fragile constant rhythm of caring for something helpless. They named him Luca, not after anyone, not pulled from old family roots, just a name they both liked. But still, when I first whispered it aloud, I felt something shift in me, as if I had been waiting to call something by name for years, and only now had permission. I visited often, but never unannounced. Megan always texted, and I always replied. We had learned how to respect each other's space the hard way. The room I once slept in was now filled with pastel blankets and tiny socks. I never stepped inside unless asked, and yet the door was always open. Josh sometimes left me alone with Luca while they napped or caught up on errands. He'd bundle the baby into my arms, half joking about grandma training hours, but there was a softness in his voice, now that didn't exist before. Less performance, more trust. I didn't overstep. I didn't give advice unless it was asked. But every now and then, Megan would come sit across from me, eyes heavy with tiredness, and ask a question in a voice just above a whisper. "How did you get him to sleep?" she once asked, rubbing her temple as Luca cried into the crook of her shoulder. I'd smile and answer, always gently, never with the smugness of someone who knows better. Just one mother passing along the map she once drew by trial and error. Megan had grown quieter in recent weeks. She still watched everything with the alertness of someone who'd spent her life performing under scrutiny, but there was something unguarded about her now. I caught her once humming to Luca while folding towels, not a lullaby, just an old melody, off-key, but steady. I didn't interrupt. I just listened from the hallway. One Sunday, I brought over a small wooden box. Inside were the keepsakes I'd once kept buried in drawers and closets. A pair of Josh's baby shoes, a hospital bracelet, a pressed flower. James had sent me in a letter when he was stationed in Germany. I laid them out carefully on the table. Josh picked up the shoes and turned them over in his hands. I forgot how small I was. "You still had big opinions," I said. Megan picked up the letter. "This is from James?" I nodded. He wrote every Sunday, never missed one. She ran her thumb across the faded ink, then looked up. Did he ever write to Josh? I paused. He did, but Josh was too young to understand. He kept them anyway. Josh looked surprised. Where are they? In the envelope beneath the letter, I said. They're yours now. He took the envelope with a kind of reverence. Not just for the paper, but for the silence that had filled the house since James died. It was the first time in years I'd spoken of my husband without the room folding in on itself. That night, I stayed for dinner. Luca fussed halfway through the meal, and Megan stood to take him, but Josh placed a hand on hers. Let her, he said, nodding toward me. I held Luca through the rest of dinner, rocking gently in the chair they had once planned to store in the garage. After dessert, Megan walked me to the car. She didn't say much, but just before I stepped inside, she placed her hand on my arm. I don't know what changed, she said, but I'm glad it did. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman who rolled her eyes at my suggestions or pushed me toward the door, but someone who had broken and rebuilt herself under the weight of a new life. You changed, I said quietly, and so did I. The drive home was silent. No music, no calls, just the sound of tires moving across familiar roads. When I stepped inside the rental house, I noticed the stillness immediately. The quiet had once felt like absence. Now it felt like completion. I was no longer hiding here. I was choosing it for now. I sat by the window, tea in hand, watching the breeze shake the branches of the tree outside. The light was golden. That end-of-day softness that makes even the most ordinary houses glow. Luca wouldn't remember the sharp words, the slammed doors, the moments of unspoken hurt. He would only know the version of me I chose to be once I reclaimed myself. That had to be enough. The invitation came on a Tuesday, plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a card, white, textured, with gold lettering embossed in quiet elegance. Luca D'Arienzo, welcome to the world. Please join us for his blessing and naming ceremony. Below, in Megan's unmistakable handwriting, was a note. We hope you'll speak at the gathering. Say something about where we come from, and maybe what Luca should know as he grows. I stared at those words for a long time. Where we come from. Not you. Not they. But I placed the card on the table beside the red folder. The folder still sat there, though I hadn't opened it in weeks. Not because I forgot about it, but because I no longer needed to look inside to remember who I was. The ceremony would be held in the same backyard where I had once sat alone while Megan prepared for her baby shower, barely acknowledging me. This time, they were making room. I arrived early, not out of habit, but intention. I wanted to see the space before it filled with people and conversations and music. Josh was stringing soft white lights across the fence. Megan stood beneath a pergola, adjusting a linen tablecloth. Neither looked surprised when I walked in. You're early, Megan said, smiling. I hoped you would be. Josh helped me up the back steps, where a chair had already been placed at the end of a row, under the large oak tree. A cushion sat on the seat. Blue. Megan nodded toward it. We figured you'd want to sit in the front. I smoothed my hands over my cardigan. Only if you're sure. We are, she said. Your family, not furniture. The ceremony was simple. A few close friends. The rabbi Megan grew up with a white cloth beneath the baby's feet. Warm spring air, lifting the scent of rosemary and citrus from the garden beds. Luca was passed gently from arm to arm until Josh carried him toward me and asked, will you say something? I hadn't written anything down. I didn't need to. I stood slowly and took Luca in my arms. He was heavier now, more alert, his eyes wide and searching. I looked out over the small gathering, familiar faces, new ones. A community forming around this child, like stone walls stacked with care. When Luca's mother first met me, I began, we didn't always understand each other. We loved the same man in different ways. We both believed we were protecting him, and maybe, in our stubbornness, we forgot that love doesn't have to feel like war. The garden was still. Even the breeze seemed to pause. I want Luca to know that history matters, I said. But it doesn't have to trap us. We get to choose which parts we carry and which parts we build from. I looked down at him. May you grow with roots deep enough to hold you and wings strong enough to move you forward. May you learn that making space for others doesn't mean losing your own. There were no claps, only silence, and then breath. like everyone needed a moment before returning to the present. Later, after the last guest had gone and the tables had been cleared, Megan found me standing beside the old rosemary bush near the kitchen door. "You were right," she said, "about how we treated you, about how quiet things can still hurt." I didn't respond immediately. I reached down and plucked a sprig from the bush, rolling it gently between my fingers. "Regret isn't the same as repair," I said. "But you've started. That matters." She nodded, eyes soft. "We don't want you to go back to the rental. Josh and I talked about it. We want you here, not as a guest, not as a ghost, but as yourself." I looked toward the house, once a battleground, now something more porous, still flawed, still learning. "I'll think about it," I said. "Fair," she replied. As I left, the porch light flicked on behind me. Not by accident, not out of obligation, just a light left on. That night, back in the rental, I sat at the small kitchen table, the red folder still unopened beside the card from the invitation. I didn't need to pack. I would take my time. But for the first time since James passed, I didn't feel like I was drifting. I had a place. Not because they gave it to me, but because I had claimed it. With silence, with steadiness, with truth. I had rolled away with the deed, but I had returned with more. Not power, not payback, but a name and a voice.